Listen, as possibly the #1 most outspoken Chainsaw Man manga supporter on the internet, I've never once said that Tatsuki Fujimoto has missed when making a chapter. And that's because, well, some chapters of Chainsaw Man just aren't as good as others. I mean, that's the way that manga's gonna be sometimes. I really, and I mean genuinely, do not think Chainsaw Man has ever had a bad chapter. But with that said, the last 10 chapters of this story make every other chapter seem bad. And for no chapter is that more true than for the most recent chapter of Chainsaw Man that just dropped, chapter 198, which just slapped the entirety of the Chainsaw Man fandom in the face with one of the biggest plot twists in manga history. A plot twist that not only did none of us see coming, but also a plot twist that has left those of us who read manga with the sole purpose of analyzing it with next to no answers. See, because chapter 198 of Chainsaw Man has proven to even the most analytical readers of Chainsaw Man that we were wrong about a lot of things, as the Death Devil's identity has now truly been revealed, and a chapter that released on April 1st showed us that Tatsuki Fujimoto does in fact have a sense of humor. Because if you thought the Death Devil was the crying girl who had the ability to suck life out of people and thus save them through death, then boy oh boy do I have an April Fool's Day joke for you. Because not only was it not that character, the Death Devil has actually been with us for almost the entirety of part 2. And not only that, the Death Devil has also been a driving force in trying to stop the Death Devil. Because according to chapter 198, the Death Devil is Fami. You know, one of the members of the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, the devil that wanted to live amongst the humans, the devil that crafted the plan to make Denji and Asa strong enough to defeat the Death Devil. Yeah, that Fami is the Death Devil. But how is Fami as the Death Devil skating under the radar for this long? Shouldn't the War Devil or the Control Devil recognize her? And why is she trying to make Denji and Asa strong enough to kill her? And maybe, more importantly than anything, what are her plans here on Earth? And how does it all tie back into the Nostradamus prophecy? Well, today we're going to be trying to answer all those questions and more, because today we're talking we were wrong about the Death Devil. But before we get to diving in on how we were wrong, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Listen, usually the best April Fool's joke we get in the anime community every year is that Hunter x Hunter's anime is coming back. But Tatsuki Fujimoto is specifically setting up a new, powerful 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse-esque character, and purposely baiting his entire fandom into believing that she's the Death Devil by having her say the word death over and over again, just to reveal that she's the actual Famine Devil, all on April Fool's Day. Has got to be one of the most monumentally impressive April Fool's Day's jokes I've ever seen. But how did this all come to pass? What were the key events that led up to the Death Devil's true identity being revealed as Fami? Well, before we dive into what the Death Devil's possible motivations were to mask around as Fami, and before we try and figure out exactly what her current plan is, let's build out as much context as we can here and go over the events of chapter 198. Chapter 198 starts off where chapter 197 left off. That is to say, with our newfound Horsemen of the Apocalypse laying on the ground, decapitated and sliced into bits by the Justice Chainsaw Man Devil crossover event. We know now that this character on the ground in pieces is the Famine Devil, aka Fami. And thus, as Fami lays on the ground, sliced into bits, she begs the Justice Devil to take the 2,000 yen out of the pocket that she has on her shirt and to leave her alone. Now, 2,000 yen, for those of you who don't know, is like $12. So this isn't exactly a great bribe, and probably makes it all the easier for the Justice Devil to give the response that he ends up giving, which is that money is worthless and that its value is only propped up by the government, which leads Fami to let out a very Chainsaw Man-esque eep, and then follow up that eep by telling the Justice Devil that she doesn't care about his conspiracy theories and that she has to save humanity. To which the Justice Devil responds with the question of through death, and then he begins to interrogate the decapitated corpse of Fami, saying your so-called salvation means the slaughter of all mankind. It means eliminating human suffering through death, right? He then goes on an indignant rant about how he, as the Justice Devil, sees through this false niceness, telling the woman that he's sliced into finely cubed bits. Since you're a devil, you probably don't understand why we humans decide to live in this hellish world. It's because this world is full of hope. Chainsaw Man was able to see that, which is why he clawed himself out of hell to protect us. And thus we now know why this Justice Devil human crossover has taken the shape of Chainsaw Man. Because he's a big Chainsaw Man fan. And he believes that the purpose of Chainsaw Man is to send devils back to hell where they belong. He then closes out this speech by saying, but just and righteous thoughts mean nothing to you, do they? Death Devil. And immediately we can see that the decapitated skull of Fami shows a face of confusion. But after showing this face of confusion, we see Fami pull herself back together. And it's revealed that she'd been able to suck the life force out of a couple of ants that had crawled up to the pieces of her body. And with that drained life force, she had found enough energy to bring her body back together. Now this prompts a shocked expression from the Justice Devil as he asks her, "Did you just absorb the life of those ants?" To which she says, "Exactly. I am she who absorbs life. She who saves people from their suffering via death. I am one of the four horsemen feared by humans and devils alike. I am the Famine Devil." Now, as Fami gets prepared to fight against the Justice Devil now for the third time, the Justice Devil interjects in her yelling about how she understands his karate to say, time out. So you're not the Death Devil? To which the now we know as Fami responds by, "The Death Devil? No, that's my..." And before she's able to finish her thought, we see the Fami who we used to think was Fami, that we now know is the Death Devil, tilt her head and say, "Falling." At which point, the real Fami and the Justice Devil are slammed into the ground by gigantic invisible hands. And once again, we are treated to the spectacular vision of the Falling Devil, one of the four strongest devils in existence that represents the primal fear of falling. Now, as the real Fami and the Justice Devil are pinned to the ground from the gravity being applied to them by the Falling Devil, the Falling Devil asks the old Fami, or the Death Devil, "May I take your order?" To which she responds by saying, "Chef's choice." And thus the Falling Devil flies off at the speed of God knows what to decapitate 3 civilians and a giraffe and serve them up on a plate for the Death Devil, alongside Fami and the Justice Devil. At this point, the Death Devil descends down to the plate and says, "I'm sorry, Fami. I used your name." And it's this point that Fami yells at the Death Devil and says, "Big sis, please, if you still feel anything for humanity, die." And it's this point that the Death Devil begins to undo her belt and lift her dress, revealing a wide, gaping wound that goes all the way up her torso as she reveals to Fami and the Justice Devil that she disposed of all of her organs, and yet she still couldn't die. With that, chapter 198 comes to a close. And immediately after the ending of this chapter, we as readers are left with a ton of questions. But I really think there's only 3 that truly matter and need answering. And in terms of importance, from least to most important, that is, those 3 questions are: how didn't the War or Control Devil realize that the Death Devil was masquerading as Fami? 2, why did the Death Devil help orchestrate a plan that would make the Chainsaw Devil and the War Devil powerful enough to kill her? And 3, what are the Death Devil's plans? Go ahead and answer that first question. Why didn't the Control Devil or the War Devil know that the Death Devil was masquerading as Fami? Well, the answer that a lot of people would probably give you in the scenario, which actually isn't technically the correct one, would be because the Death Devil has gone through the cycle of reincarnation a couple of times that the Control Devil and War Devil wouldn't necessarily know what she looks like. Yes, they'd be able to identify that she's one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse on account of her eyes and the fact that she would probably tell everybody that she was either the Death Devil or the Famine Devil. And we, as the readers, and they, as the Control and War Devils, really had no reason to believe that the Death Devil wasn't the Famine Devil, on account of the fact that A, we never saw Fami use any devil abilities, and B, she had an insatiable appetite, eating basically everything in sight. And thus it felt as though basically everything that needed to line up to prove that the Death Devil was actually the Famine Devil lined up. However, moving forward with this explanation actually doesn't work. See, because, well, yes, the War Devil and the Control Devil and even the Famine Devil have all gone through the reincarnation cycle before. And those characters like the Control Devil have been Makima or Naoto or possibly a 3rd reincarnation. And thus, not until Makima makes it known, either by telling people or by showing off Control Devil abilities, will people, like even her sisters, be able to know, oh, that's the Control Devil, one of my sisters. However, the same line of logic does not apply to the Death Devil. See, the Death Devil is one of the 4 primal devils. And the number one most important thing about the primal devils, outside of the fact that they are the most powerful devils in all of the Chainsaw Man universe, is the fact that none of them have ever left hell, on account of the fact that none of them have ever died. And thus, fundamentally, the Darkness Devil, the Aging Devil, the Falling Devil, and the Death Devil have never not looked like they currently look. They've never been fiends, they've never reincarnated on Earth, they've always been devils tied to hell. And thus, if one was going to try to make the argument that, oh, the Death Devil looks differently than she did in previous reincarnation cycles, that argument doesn't stand up on its own. However, due to the other aspect of the reincarnation cycle, which is those who go through it forget all of the memories they have of their previous life, and as both War and the Control Devils have most likely gone through the reincarnation cycle since the last time they saw their sister, the Death Devil, there's a fair amount of possibility that both of them just simply forgot what she looked like. And that would have to be the most likely explanation as to why Asa, Naota, or Makima weren't able to identify that Fami was in actuality the Death Devil. So with that out of the way, that leads us to our second, more important, but much harder to answer question of why has the Death Devil been doing any of the things that it's been doing for the last couple of months? See, part 2 of Chainsaw Man is a story of different factions trying to accomplish different things. Yoshida and the Devil Hunters have been trying to make sure that Denji never reveals his identity as the Chainsaw Man and goes off to live a regular life as a high schooler, eventually erasing the entire concept of the Chainsaw Man from the Japanese zeitgeist. However, while this is what the special divisions have been trying to accomplish, the higher-ups of the Japanese government have been trying to use the power of Chainsaw Man, specifically his devil erasure ability, to eliminate devils and therefore concepts that humanity finds cumbersome, like aging. And while all of this is going on, Yoru, the War Devil, has been trying to coax the Chainsaw Man out of Denji so that it can kill Chainsaw Man as revenge for the battle that they had decades ago. But Asa doesn't want this because Asa wants to live a regular and sedated life with Denji as her boyfriend. And thus Asa's been trying to separate Denji from Pochita so that Yoru can kill Chainsaw Man, but Denji can live a regular life. All the while, Denji has wanted to live as Chainsaw Man because he loves the fame and the power, but he's also torn between loving the fame and the power and just wanting to live a regular life with his little sister Naota and his presumed girlfriend Asa. And while all of this has been happening, Fami has been in the background saying, yo, by the way, remember that Nostradamus prophecy that Yoshida told us about? The one about how the King of Fear was going to descend down to the earth in July of 1999, wipe out all of humanity, ushering in an age of devils? Yeah, that's gonna happen, and that King of Fear is the Death Devil. And the only way to make sure that that doesn't happen is to make sure that Denji and Asa get as strong as possible. So turn a bunch of people into imposter Chainsaw Mans and have them go to war against each other, strengthening fear in the Chainsaw Man and in the War Devil. And as we know in the Chainsaw Man universe, fear is proportional to strength. This was an incredible idea, and it's already been shown to make Chainsaw Man and the War Devil stronger, as a combination of Asa and Yoru is league stronger than they were in the beginning of part 2, where they struggled to turn items into a weapon, but now we're able to turn the Statue of Liberty into a giant skeletal finger gun. And it's gotten to the point where the combined forces of Asa and Denji working together were able to take down a primal devil in aging, something that they weren't able to do against the falling devil without the help of fake Saw Man. However, one can argue that with any amount of strength that Denji and Asa gain, the Death Devil also gains. See, the reason that the Death Devil is so incredibly powerful, and probably the most powerful out of all the primal devils, is because inherently every single fear ties back to the fear of death. You're only afraid of aging, darkness, and falling because at the end of all of those things is usually death. You're only afraid of war and chainsaws because they cause death. And therefore, there's a pretty solid argument to be made here that the reason that fake Fami was trying to make the Chainsaw Man and the War Devil as strong as possible, because in a world where you could at any point bust a random chainsaw out of your forehead that would lead to all of your family and loved ones needing to stab you to death with sharpened sticks, has probably about as much fear surrounding the concept of death as there's ever been in human history. And thus, well, yes, absolutely, the fear towards the Chainsaw Man and the War Devil is 100% making those two entities stronger. There's also more fear of death than there's ever been before. And thus the only reason that she decided to make Asa and Denji stronger was to make herself strong enough to enact the apocalypse. However, there's also the possibility that that's not the case. See, there's also the possibility that the Death Devil has been trying to make Denji and Asa strong enough to kill her. And the end scene of chapter 198 kind of proves that point. See, because when the real Fami is begging her sister to die if she has any love left for humanity, the Death Devil reveals that she's removed every single one of her organs in an attempt to die. A failed attempt to die, but still an attempt, implying that the Death Devil probably doesn't want to be alive and also probably doesn't want to enact the apocalypse. See, the Nostradamus prophecy that we heard from Yoshida, you know, the octopus guy, stated that the King of Fear would descend descend down to Earth in July of 1999, and that all of humanity would die, leading to the Age of Devils. We've covered all this. Now, what we also learned from Yoshida in this moment is that the Devil Hunters of Japan actually released 30 convicts and made them make a contract with the future devil that told each and every single one of them when they would die. And 23 out of the 30 heard that they would die in July of 1999. However, when Yoshida gives this exposition, he doesn't necessarily have an explanation as to why the other 7 aren't gonna die in July of 1999. And it's at this point that the person that we knew as Fami, but was actually the Death Devil, stated, well, that's because the other 7 are gonna die this week. And oh yeah, by the way, 40 seconds ago, the Falling Devil, one of the primal devils, descended onto Earth. Now that was kind of a red flag. How did Fami know that these 7 convicts were gonna die this week in the chaos that the Falling Devil was about to enact? And also, how did Fami know that the Falling Devil was now here on Earth? I mean, obviously, as the Famine Devil, one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, she had a pretty great cover story for being kind of all-knowing, as basically every single interaction we've had with any of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse has been terrifying and basically omnipotent. But that was a lot of information for the Famine Devil to know. So now that the Famine Devil was actually the Death Devil, it makes a fair amount more sense, especially when you consider the fact that the Death Devil appears to have control over the Falling Devil. Now, somewhat confusingly, in this exact same moment, the Death Devil warns that the Falling Devil is actually the beginning of the ushering in of the apocalypse. That this primal devil wreaking chaos along the streets of Tokyo is the first step in the Nostradamus prophecy. And considering the fact that the Falling Devil appearing in Tokyo kills at least 2,000 people in Tokyo alone, and probably leads to way more deaths across the globe, as the Falling Devil even appearing on Earth leads to mass gravity fluctuations across the entire globe. In a sense here, the Death Devil was correct. The Falling Devil appearing is absolutely apocalyptic. However, rather interestingly, the Death Devil in this moment seems opposed to the Falling Devil. While who we knew as Fami didn't help, obviously, in the battle against the Falling Devil, and we now know that she is the Death Devil who's probably responsible for summoning the Falling Devil in the first place, her willingly sharing the information that A, the Falling Devil is here, and B, this is the beginning of the apocalypse, seems to be preparing anybody who could ever stand a chance against her and the Falling Devil for their arrival. And thus, when answering the question of why has the Death Devil been doing any of this, there's really only 2 possible answers. 1, everything leading up to this moment has been making her as the Death Devil strong enough to enact the apocalypse, or 2, the enactment of the apocalypse is actually not something the Death Devil wants. See, we don't know why the Nostradamus prophecy is going to come true. We understand that the Death Devil is going to descend down to Earth and that will lead to the destruction of humanity, but there's nowhere in that prophecy that states the Death Devil wants to do this. And as it's a well-known fact that the more human-like a devil looks, the more amenable and loving they are of the human cause, which is why devils like the Angel Devil actually fought to exterminate devils on Earth. The Death Devil, who just straight up looks like a girl, should be as amenable and loving to the human cause as the rest of the other 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And well, none of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are good people. They're not as straight up evil as other devils that look nothing like humans, like the Bat Devil. With some of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, like Fami, going so far as trying to actually save humanity from the Death Devil, her sister. And thus the answer to why the Death Devil is doing all of this is because she doesn't want to fulfill the prophecy that she herself is a part of. But that brings us to the third, final, and most logical question to ask here. Okay, then what's her plan? Well, currently it looks like it's kill Fami, but beyond that, we're not entirely sure. See, currently, here's the thing. The only people who know that Fami is actually the Death Devil are currently sitting on a gigantic plate with some decapitated skulls and a giraffe. That is to say that the only people who would be able to tell the rest of humanity that Fami is the Death Devil are the real Fami and the Justice Devil. And thus, if these 2 relatively new characters die, fake Fami's secret is safe. And this is not the first time that we've seen something like this happen in the Chainsaw Man manga. See, when it was revealed that Makima was not only the control devil, but also evil, was when Makima found Reze in an alley and killed her. And after this, basically any time that anybody figured out that Makima was the control devil, like when Angel remembered their backstory and how they began their relationship with Makima, that eventually led to all of Angel's autonomy being stripped from them as they tried to battle against Makima. Every single time somebody figured out Makima's true identity, she either just took control of them or killed them. And thus we could be seeing something somewhat similar to that happening right now. See, it seems as though the Death Devil is actually enjoying living amongst humanity. She's a part of her school planning committee, and she's helping her high school get ready ready for their upcoming festival. So for the next couple of chapters, after possibly the real Fami and the Justice Devil are killed, the story may continue in a way comparable to how it continued after we realized that Makima was evil, where we as the readers just simply have to have sweat trickle down our faces while we watch Denji interact with fake Fami, all the while knowing that this woman who's presenting as the Famine Devil and is proposing ways that they can defeat the Death Devil is actually the Death Devil herself. And she's either trying to make Denji and Asa strong enough to kill her, or she's trying to gather enough strength to wipe out all of humanity. Or the Death Devil's heel turn is going to be much less subtle than Makima's, as the summoning of the Falling Devil could act as the first step in their apocalyptian tour, and the next couple of chapters could truly once and for all usher in the end of part 2, as Denji and Asa have to battle against the Death Devil that they've been prepping for months now. But quite honestly, as it stands, out of all of the questions, what's her plan is the one I have the most trouble answering. The only answers that come to me are either die or conquer, but neither of those feel correct. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think. What do you think the Death Devil's grand plan is? Tell me about it in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. If there's one manga I cannot predict, it's this one.